Hi, and welcome back to Worm Watts, where we harness the God-given power of compost worms to transform organic waste into amazing living fertilizer. Today I am back in the e-bin, and I've not really been looking forward to opening this up because it's been a smelly bin. But today we're going to dig into it. We're going to see how bad it is, and I think we have a fix. So let's dive in. All right off the bat, I don't know if you can see it, but I've got a cloud of flies. Whew. Yeah, there are flies all over the place. And you can see that the chaff, look at the chaff right there. It's actually dry in that area, but man, this cloud of flies is something else. And then we've got the castings, which the castings seem to look, they seem fine, honestly. Put my hand in there and just kind of feel around. Yeah, the castings are actually at a really good place. And you can see the worms in there. Sorry, if I can focus in on there. You can see the worms in there. These worms seem to be doing just fine. The worms are everywhere. So they really seem to be liking the conditions in here, at least in that spot. Let me try another spot just to make sure. But yeah, wow. Yeah, the worm density in here is insane. So for what it's worth, feeding animal products definitely can be done in the worm bin and seems to be able to be done to the benefit of the worms as long as you do it carefully. I'm kind of curious as to why there's this little shape here where the castings seem to be dry inside of that. And then everywhere else, they've kind of settled down. It's kind of interesting to see. But yeah, you can see flies are just about everywhere. I actually really like the moisture level of these castings though. And I don't want to do... Whoa, I've got fly larvae on my hand. Goodness. Okay. So yeah, everybody's doing well down there. Flies included. But yeah, you can see fly larvae in the actual... Goodness, look at all those worms. Golly. So yeah, there are worms everywhere, and they do not seem to be impacted negatively. Like, I don't see what's known as a string of pearls, which would usually be a telltale sign of protein poisoning. So that was one of our main concerns when we were feeding the animal products. Is that you will see your worms basically look like a snake would if it ate like a bunch of eggs, with just little, almost like there are little balls inside of the worm. But the worms look just fine. They are not showing that sign of protein poisoning, so they seem to be doing great. But I do want to do something about the smell of the bin. I'm just going to dig a little bit further down. Okay, here's the bones. Here are some of the bones that we left from last time. And you can actually see that they are covered with what appear to be maybe maggots. I can't tell whether they're maggots or... At some points I've guessed like some kind of potworm or something. Whew, no, those look like maggots. And they are all over that. So yeah. Yeah, there are maggots down there in the bones. Man, yeah. So it's not fun to deal with, but yeah, you can see them. I'm zooming in so that you can really get a good view of them. They also shrink away from the light, but it does not seem to be harming the worms in any way. The worms seem to be doing just fine. But to try to put a little bit of a damper on the the fly problem, I'm going to go ahead and add in a brown material to try to help with the, I think it will help to minimize the smell as well, because this is a very absorbent brown material, and I think it will help to keep the flies at bay to some degree. So let me go ahead and pull out the brown material that I'm thinking about. And I also recently finished a video on my bokashi, and I have some curds that I'm also going to look at adding into here. Some curds from our fermented milk. So I'll go ahead and add those in. They're in a cloth, and I'll just add the cloth with those in here. I'm sure the flies will want that. I'm sure that the worms will also enjoy it. And then we'll go ahead and cover all of this with our brown material. So go ahead and pull all that stuff out, and we'll get started. All right, so here we are. I reoriented the bin, and right over here I've got the cloth containing the curds, and to my right I have a bucket that is full of our new brown material, which is lovely sawdust. So I was able to find a local woodworker who did not mind parting with the sawdust. So I've got a little scoop here. I'm gonna go ahead and just pour that over the top here. And just a word of advice, if you're going to use sawdust, which I think is a fantastic material if you get the opportunity to use it, you'll want to look for sawdust that's not treated. So some sawdust, or some woods are treated, which means that the resulting sawdust would also be chemically treated, and you don't want that. So all right, we've gone ahead. Whew, the cloud of flies kind of just blew up in my face from adding in this sawdust. I don't think they liked that too much, so they seem to have left the bin, which is kind of nice. At least they'll be out of the way. And this sawdust is going to be quite absorbent, so I imagine that it's going to help to help with moisture management in the bin. But I just wanted to get a base layer down before we add in the curds, which are going to add their own moisture. So let's go ahead and see if I can just drop that in right over here. I think I've got the bones are in this end, so I'd like to put the curds in a different location. And now I want to go ahead and cover that over. And my hope is that it'll make it less accessible to the flies, and that it will just compost a little bit on its own, and that the worms will get there in time. So just gonna give a nice layer. Nothing wrong with some browns in there. I'm not too concerned about the moisture being too negatively affected. I feel like this is a fair little feeding, if not a little bit heavy on browns, but again, not too concerned about that. We'll check on it again in a little bit of time and see what's coming of that and whether we need to add more moisture. But for the time being, I feel comfortable with what we've done so far. And we're going to top that finally with some of our grit, some of our eggshell grit, and then we will be done in this bin. It was not as traumatic as I was thinking it would be. Obviously, the smell, I would say, is still there. It's not as strong, but the flies, yeah, a lot of flies. So not something to try if you are not a fan of enduring a little bit for the sake of learning and testing things out. and I'm definitely getting a taste of that. So I hope it's to your benefit. Thanks for joining us in the journey. Time to top this with some eggshell grit and call it a day. All right, got the eggshell. And just scoop and pour some of that in there. And some more. And still more. And I think that should be good. So because because the sawdust is so absorbent, I'm kind of curious to see how the ambient moisture will penetrate it, and how moist the sawdust portions will be. I didn't put a super thick layer, but I think we've put down at least maybe you know, an inch, about an inch maybe, of sawdust over over all of this. And so just seeing how it does with the moisture in the bin will be very interesting to me. I do think it's going to help with keeping the smells down. There are just going to be flies present in the bin, and I imagine that that's just going to be that way for a little bit until things die down and until the food source runs out. But it's just very interesting to see what's going to come of it. Again, we've got our curds in the cloth. Curious to see how the cloth will break down and how the curds will break down. And of course, we got our bones in this area. So really interesting bin overall, the E-bin. And we've been feeding some interesting stuff. So I'm really curious to see how it'll go. But again, one big takeaway from this is that the worms seem to be thriving. As far as their population goes, they seem to be doing just great in a bin that has been fed with animal products. The only thing is that along with the worms, though, we've got a lot of fly larvae and things like that. Last time I noticed, or I thought I noted, potworms, and I'm not 100% sure if those were potworms or if those were maybe larvae. So that's just an asterisk if you're watching this and trying to figure out the changes that this bin is going through. I'm not quite sure if what we saw were actually potworms, so I'll continue to try to keep note of that and see if we do see something that that looks clearly like a potworm, or if we're probably just looking at larvae that were opportunistic. So thanks for joining us, and I'm gonna get out of this cloud of flies. See you next time.